Part of caring for any pet snake is handling them regularly in order to socialize them. I try to spend time with socialization with each one of my snakes about once a week or so. And although I enjoy it, it is a little bit time consuming, but it is important because a well socialized snake is going to be a much more stress free snake. And it's going to be a lot less bothered by your presence whenever you have to go into the enclosure to do all of the different things that you need to do in order to care for them. Having a certain amount of trust between you and your snake is going to make both of your lives a lot easier. And while this isn't a video about how to socialize your snake, I can tell you that there are a number of different correct ways to go about that. It sometimes just depends on your own individual snake's personality as far as how you approach that socialization. In my last video, I talked about how spring is coming and all of the frogs in the room can sense that, and they've just been so much more vocal. Well, I've seen the same thing with all of my snakes. All of the sexually mature male snakes have just been out cruising their enclosures. Their hormones are just raging right now, and they're looking for mates. So this might get a little interesting, but nonetheless, in today's video, I'm going to handle every one of my snakes and talk about their personalities and talk about what that socialization process has been like for them. And while the best time to socialize a snake is when they're young, I think I'll start from the youngest to the oldest. So hold on just a minute and I'm going to go get a baby. I love working with baby snakes, and this is one of the babies from the most recent litter of baby garter snakes. And this one, who I think is a female, is one of the largest of the group, and she's also the most feisty one. And I think that's one of the things I like most about her. Although if she stays that way, I might change my mind after she grows into an adult. But I think she's going to take a little bit more work than some of her brothers and sisters. And what's really nice about having these baby garter snakes is I've been able to work on their socialization from the very moment that they were born. And so their socialization is happening pretty quickly and pretty easily. At this age, you don't have to worry at all about them biting because they're so small they can't even get a hold of you. But they are pretty squirmy and they're very small and fragile, so you do have to be very careful when you're handling them. But just like any snake, once she's in my hands and she knows I'm not a threat, she calms down pretty quickly. And right now she's pretty relaxed. So I'm going to put her back and go get one of her brothers. This little one is, I think, a male, and he's one of the smallest ones of the litter. And he's definitely one of my favorites because he just has the sweetest personality. While all the others are still a little bit cautious about me, he just crawls right into my hand, and he's very inquisitive, and he has no fear. I really love this little snake. You'll have to excuse me if I'm not looking at the camera, but I really have to keep my eyes on these guys when I handle them because they can move pretty fast. So the reason I chose these two to show you is to show you that every different snake has its own individual personality, just like people do. And that can definitely have an impact on the socialization process, how long it might take and how easy it is, or even what kind of approach you might take to their socialization. So I'm going to put him back and we'll move on to the next one. And definitely not the smallest, but my next youngest snake is my boa constrictor, Ray. And Ray is a very chill snake. He's never shown any defensiveness. He's never struck at me or hissed at me. He's about 2.5 years old right now. And for the first 6 months of his life with me, Ray seemed like he was very stressed. And so for my first goal, and he's acting a little squirmy right now, but for Ray's first 6 months or so of his life with me, he seemed like he was very stressed. So my first goal with Ray was not so much to tame him as much as it was to help him feel comfortable and safe. So my approach to socializing Ray at first was to spend less time handling him and less frequently, and let that process take place a little more slowly. And he's been making a lot of progress. Boa constrictors have a very strong feeding response. So one thing I definitely do when I handle Ray is I use a snake hook and give him some gentle rubbing on with the snake hook. And it definitely kind of teaches him to know that it's not feeding time. And that's worked pretty well. And while Ray is still a juvenile snake, he still doesn't have that totally confident attitude that an adult snake will grow into, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But he's a beautiful snake, and he's just so much fun to interact with. You saw that he got a little spastic on me there a minute ago, but he's definitely calmed down now. And whenever you're working with your snakes, if anything happens to spook them or startle them, don't immediately put them back into their enclosure. You should always end every handling or socialization session on a positive note. So just keep handling them and let them calm back down. So when you put them back in their enclosure, it's ending on a positive experience for them. So I'm going to put Ray back and we'll move on to the next one. So my next oldest snake is Rex, my California king snake. And king snakes have a very strong feeding response as well. So he's another one that I have to watch out for a little bit. It sometimes takes Rex a little bit longer than other snakes to figure out that there's no food coming. But once I can see that he's not in that feeding mode, A quick and confident grab is usually really helpful with him. I can just get him up in my hands before he has any time to react. So let's see how that goes. And as you can see, once he's up in my hands, he's a perfectly calm snake. And he's come a long way. Whoa. He might be a little horny too. But he has come a long way. Rex, more than any other snake in this room, has taken the longest to socialize. When he was a baby, he was just very squirmy and did not like being handled or picked up and taken out of his enclosure. He is about 3 months older than Ray. So he's a little older than 2.5 years. And with him, I just had to be patient. It took a lot of time, really about 2 years, for him to calm down like this. And he doesn't musk on me nearly as much as what he used to. With Rex, I just had to get him used to that quick and confident grab. And I did have to just learn how to recognize his feeding response so that I know if he's in that feeding mode or not. But he is a very docile and sweet snake, and just a lovely snake to handle. And he's beautiful. And usually I would take a snake out and handle it for about, 20 or 30 minutes. But since I don't want this video to get too long, I'll go ahead and put Rex back and we'll move on to the next one. So I mentioned earlier that there are a number of different ways and correct ways to socialize a snake. And these guys have been a little bit special, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But when I talked about the other snakes being hormonal and looking for mates, this one already has a mate, and I know that they were doing it last week. So taking them out right now, I might be just taking my chances. They have a really, really strong feeding response. And it's also a feeding response that can be turned on and turned off really quickly and pretty easily. So one trick I do with these guys is to make sure they know that it's not feeding time. I just go into their enclosure and pretend to be doing some kind of maintenance. I might take the hide out. I might just dig around in the substrate and just do some things. And they're kind of used to that. And once I do that a little bit, they know they're not getting fed and they just get back into that inquisitive kind of calm mode. The other thing that is a challenge about the garter snakes, since they do live in here together, it's also a challenge at feeding time, is taking one of them out without the other one deciding that it wants to fly out at the same time. So I kind of have to pick my moment and watch for the right time. And just like with Rex, a quick, confident grab is really helpful with these guys. And you can see that Carol is coming up here and she wants to come out the top here. And she might be in a little bit of a feeding mode right now. And if she'll move from this corner, I can open their cage and probably get her out of that feeding mode. So let's see. You can see Daryl moving really fast right now, and I don't think that's the food response. I think that's just his attitude and maybe his hormones right now. So I might get bit, but we'll see. Daryl and Carol definitely have very distinct and different personalities. Carol is a very chill snake, but Daryl is really spastic. It's not so much that he's scared or defensive, he's just spastic. But you can see that he's being pretty well behaved. Now, here's something interesting that I can tell you about these guys. I've had them since they were hatchlings, and they're now almost 4 years old. And they've already had 2 litters of babies. And in all of that time, I can probably count on 2 hands how many times I've actually taken them out and handled them. But they're just as well socialized as any of my other snakes. And I think it's a good example of handling your snakes is not the only thing that gets them socialized. Garter snakes can be pretty messy, they poop a lot. And so I have to spend a lot of time cleaning their enclosure. And so they're really used to my hands being in the enclosure. They also eat smaller meals twice a week, so I spend more time feeding them. So I'm going to put him back and we'll get Carol. You can see the sexual dimorphism between the male and female garter snakes. The females are much larger than the males. She's a little bit tense right now, and you can tell that from how stiff her tail is right now. She's holding on to me a little tightly. But if I keep handling her, she's going to calm down and loosen up a little bit. And she is a beautiful snake. When she was younger, she had more blue and green. And as she's grown into an adult, some of that blue and green went away, but I love the yellow and orange color under her chin. So like I said, it's not just the handling that socializes them. It's all of the interactions you have with them, whether that be having your hands in the enclosure to change their water or spot clean the enclosure. I think they know that I'm the person that brings their food. And they're just used to me sitting here in front of their enclosure. And they are adults, and they've grown into that confident adult attitude that snakes do when they grow up. So that's Carol. I'm going to put her back, and we'll move on to the next one. So my next oldest snake is my ball python, Jerry. And if you follow the channel, then you've surely seen Jerry. And one thing I wanted to point out before I take him out is that he loves sitting on his limb here underneath his basking spot. And although he spends plenty of time sleeping in either his warm side hide or his cool side hide, he's just as comfortable to sleep out in the open like this. And I think that's just because he's grown into an adult. At this point in his life, he knows no predators. And that's how well socialized and how comfortable and calm Jerry is. And this is a perfect example of why you should not listen to anyone who tells you that ball pythons love to be in tiny, dark enclosures. If he wants to get in a safe, hidden spot, he can go into his hides. One thing about snakes is they don't have eyelids, so you can't really tell when they're sleeping. But I think I can tell right now because his tongue is not flicking. He's just laying perfectly still. He's not looking at me. I think he's asleep. And that is one time when you can possibly get bitten just by startling them if you wake them up too abruptly. So one thing I do when I take him out is I just give him a little bit of a gentle touch and make sure he's not asleep and let him know that I'm going to take him out of the enclosure. And one way you can tell that Jerry is a very well socialized and very calm snake is that once I take him out of his enclosure, he's not balled up, he's not stiff at all, he's very relaxed. And Jerry and I have just spent a lot of time together. I think that the breeder that I got him from might have spent some time with him as a baby, or it might be just his personality. But from the moment I first held him, he's never hissed at me, he's never struck at me, he's just puppy dog tame. And he's getting so big. And I think Jerry is the perfect example of what you get rewarded with after spending years of time socializing a snake and developing that relationship. And I completely trust him, and he completely trusts me. And you can see that Jerry is not head shy at all. But I think snakes don't like being touched on their heads, so I usually try to just respect that. So, like I said, Jerry is just a perfect example of what the end goal of socializing a snake is. And although ball pythons are known to be very docile and friendly snakes, and that's one reason why they're such popular pets, baby ball pythons can still be a little bit nippy, and I think probably the worst thing than an unsocialized baby ball python is an unsocialized adult ball python. So if he'll decide to let go of me, we'll put him back and move on. So last but not least, and my oldest snake, is my corn snake Pumpkin. And one thing about Pumpkin is that even though he is a very calm and friendly snake, he never seems to be too comfortable at the moment I take him out of his enclosure. And sometimes, even just like a baby, he still kind of wants to try to get away from me. And like I was talking with some of the others, if I just go in with a quick and confident grab, he really doesn't have that much time to react. And then once he's in my hands, he knows the routine. And Pumpkin's always very happy to come out and spend some time outside of his enclosure. You can see that Pumpkin is a really relaxed, nice snake. But just like my king snake, it seemed like it took forever to get him socialized and tamed down. For the first couple of years of his life, he just did not want to be handled. And he would just thrash around in my hands trying to get away from me. And again, he is a good example of what a snake does when they grow up and they go from that scared little baby to a confident and relaxed snake that is not really worried about too much of anything. Sometimes he does wrap around me and get a good hold on me, and just I have to go on his terms and let him just go where he wants. And like I said, it did seem like it took forever. It took about 2 years to get him to be at the place where he is at now. And I had to just be very patient with him. And that's just the personalities of different snakes. I don't know if part of that has to do with Pumpkin and Rex being both colubrid snakes or not. But I had to be very patient. It doesn't always happen overnight. Some snakes seem like they are just born that way, and some snakes tame down and get socialized very quickly, and others, like Pumpkin, just take a lot more time and work. But especially with the ones that take a lot of time and work, it's just very rewarding when you finally get to that place where you have this trusting relationship with them. So that is one reason why I always tell people if you want to get a snake, you should definitely get a baby. And that way you can watch it grow up and you can take lots of time and develop that relationship so that by the time they are an adult, this is what you get. And it's one of the most rewarding experiences any person can ever have. It just makes me wonder sometimes how someone can be so afraid of snakes. So I hope you enjoyed seeing all of the snakes. If you did, give me a like and let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.